Welcome all of you to Cafe Simpatico on Zoom. This is the seventh of a series of Zoom Cafe Simpaticos that we've had since we were closed in real gathering by the COVID. Cafe Simpatico has been a regular event of information, inspiration, and action and solidarity of the Central America Support Committee of Victoria for over 30 years. And we normally meet in a place called the Fern, again, be able to gather in person at the end of COVID. We are, however, located on the unceded. Okay. We are located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin-speaking Esquimalt Songhees First Nations people. And we need to take a moment to think of how well they lived in harmony with nature in this beautiful part of the world. And we are extremely grateful to them for sharing this land with us. And like all Coast Salish people, the eagle was very important to the Coast Salish people. And just 2 days ago, I was on the territory of the Comox people, north of Victoria, walking on the beach underneath an eagle's nest. And when I looked down at my feet, I found this beautiful eagle feather. And I don't know, can you see me, everybody? Craig, something's happened here. Craig, I seem to be muted. Okay.
I can hear you okay.
Can you hear me?
Your voice is a little bit garbled.
Okay, that's the slowness of the computer. I'll speak more slowly. I was just saying that I had been on the territory of the Comox First Nations and was underneath a very large tree on the beach. And at my feet, I found this beautiful feather. And this is the feather of the eagle, a very important part of the ecosystem that the Coast Salish people have so protected. And the eagle feather is an important part of the ceremonies of First Nations people. And so I'm planning to enjoy this for a little while and then give it to somebody to whom it really matters. So thank you all for joining us. And I would like to start with the introduction to tonight's event, which is Canada and our connections with Honduras, or Honduras and the Canadian Connection, as I titled it. Many of us are still under the illusion that Canada is a wonderful country, which has a beautiful foreign policy and that we're lovely and kind to the rest of the world. And it's perhaps time that many of us learned a little bit more about how Canada treat our government and our corporations that our government supports treats the rest of the world. And we're starting with Central America and Honduras, which has had a very important part of Canadian foreign policy has been enacted in Honduras. And our first speaker tonight is going to be Phil Little. And Phil Little has had many years of experience going to Honduras, working with Father Mellis, who does a human rights radio program, protecting him and accompanying him, and at the same time, learning and revealing much of what has gone on in Honduras with the Canadian connection. So I would like to ask you all to please mute your sound and enjoy and be inspired by the words of Phil.
Thank you very much. It's my great delight to be with you tonight to talk about Honduras. I'm always willing to talk about Honduras, and especially honored to participate with Karen Spring, with Janet Spring, mother of Karen, whom I met in person. I met Karen in Honduras, and whose advocacy for human rights is well known. Following your lead, uh, I acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Susuminos and the Penelakut nations in the Ladysmith and Chemainus area. From my living room, I can look out to Penelakut Island, which once had a residential school with all the abuses and the injustices that that symbolizes. I acknowledge that I speak from a land that knows and still perpetuates injustices towards indigenous peoples. And so talking about Honduras, I remember that the finger that we point sometimes points back, right? So tonight, I also acknowledge one of my personal heroes, Father Dan Berrigan. It was on this night, on this day in 2016, that Father Dan died. He was also a Jesuit like Father Mallow. Uh, Dan Berrigan was a peacemaker and a poet, and he was the first Catholic priest to be on the American FBI most wanted list. So kudos to Father Dan. And I remember him as I speak. Could we have the first image, please?
Yes, Phil, we're just noticing that the sound is a bit distorted. So if everyone who's not muted can mute themselves, and also, um, I don't know where you are compared to your microphone on your
You
computer.
can't hear me very well?
It's distorted.
Okay, I'll move the microphone. Okay, I'm moving it a bit closer. How's that?
That seems better.
Okay, so the first image, please, is a picture of a caravan. I begin at the end where Honduras is today. What can we say about a country where 80% of the population dreams about fleeing the country? We're made aware of the caravans, the mass migrations of tens of thousands of people who are trying to walk north through Guatemala and Mexico to reach the United States. Men, women, families, and at times unaccompanied children are fleeing north. And on the journey, they will meet fierce repression by the military and the police of Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico, as is required and paid for by the US government. Next image, please. They will also encounter criminal gangs who specialize in human trafficking. And young women are particularly vulnerable to simply disappearing into the international sex trade. Gangs will also kidnap migrants and use their cell phones to contact family members to demand huge ransoms. Those who don't pay, and sometimes those who do pay, still end up in common burial pits. Many women migrants experience sexual violence, more than 50% of them. They are told by the coyotes, the professional smugglers, the police, the military, the gangs, and just ordinary men that they meet along the way, that they have to pay. The expression is, you have to pay with your body. And many die along the way, murdered, falling off the train, called the bestia, or if they do cross into the Rio Grande, they die of thirst in the desert, or they're hunted by vigilante squads. So the next question is, why is Honduras so bad that its people want to flee? The third image is Padre Melo. My connection to Honduras is personal. I had worked in Honduras many years ago. I had worked in Peru many years ago. My knowledge of and my interest in Honduras was very low. But in December of 1987 in Toronto, I met Melo Moreno, who had come to Canada to learn English, and there began a long and deep friendship. Father Ismael Moreno, known as Padre Melo, is a Jesuit priest, and he's currently the director of a radio station called Radio Progreso and a human rights and investigation center called ERIC. I've traveled to Honduras at his invitation to accompany him, as others have done, to offer some protection. To accompany simply means that when he goes out, I go out with him, or whoever is there with him. Not too many people are able to do this. He has been on numerous death lists, and Melo has survived assassination attempts. The next image is taken of Melo and Berta Cáceres. Through Melo, I have met many courageous and wonderful people, such as Berta Cáceres. This photo of Melo with Berta was taken at a land and water defense protest in the area called Intibuca. And at that time, the military were discussing options on how to deal with the indigenous protesters, including their supporters. And on that day in 2013, Berta asked Melo, who was a longtime friend, and she said to Melo, "Who will they get first, you or me?" It was 6 years ago that Berta received the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize in recognition of her land defense of the water, her land and water defense, and the defense of the indigenous rights of the Lenca people. The response of the government was to kill her on March the 2nd, 2015. The president of the World Bank at that time said that her murder was justified. I have accompanied Melo to many memorials for the martyrs, those who, like Berta, have been assassinated because of their human rights and territorial land defense. The next image is a map of Central America. Honduras is a small country in the center of Central America. It is 1/100th the size of Canada, or roughly the size of Newfoundland without Labrador. Most Canadians would not know where to find Honduras. Melo often complains that Honduras is the etc. country. People talk about maybe Mexico, they know where Mexico is, maybe Guatemala, and then they say, and etc. Well, those other countries. Honduras has a population of a bit less than 9 million people. And surprisingly, it has another almost 2 million people, 2 million Hondurans, who already live in the United States. This large group of expatriates is vital to the Honduran economy, with their remittances that they send to poor family members who are still surviving inside Honduras. Officially, up to 80% of Hondurans live below the official poverty level. Half of them, 40%, are considered to be living in conditions of extreme poverty. One point that I will make ahead of time is that all the problems in Honduras can also be found here in Canada and in British Columbia, except perhaps for official assassinations. We have social inequality, discrimination, neglect of indigenous rights and ancestral territories. We have police violence. We have threats against land and water defenders. And here in British Columbia, we have the threatened criminalization of those who defend old growth forests or government complicity in hydro, mining, and the fossil fuel industries. The problems of Honduras are systemic to the economic system, not peculiar to one small, underdeveloped country. My friend Father Mello has recently written 2 articles which I will use to summarize the situation in Honduras. And just as an aside, I was on a radio program last night in Honduras with Mello, and he asked about Café Simpatico. He had the privilege of meeting some of the community of Café Simpatico 3 summers ago in a garden in Victoria, and he sends his regards and his best wishes to everyone. And he's very thankful that there is this interest in Honduras. One article was titled "Las tres crisis de Honduras," the 3 crises of Honduras. Mello suggests that we look at it in this way. The first being a social crisis, a crisis that affects the majority of the people: poverty, exclusion, huge inequalities, unemployment, the sweatshop industries, and terrible desperation. All of these aspects have worsened, but they're not caused by the disastrous double disasters of the COVID crisis and the 2 hurricanes of 2020. The second crisis is environmental, which has, of course, the natural factors. There is a terrible drought in Central America, Nicaragua, and southern Honduras. But the main factors of the environmental crisis are caused by deforestation, the palm oil industry, the mineral extractive industry, and hydroelectric projects which pollute the land and privatize the sources of water. The third crisis, and of course, all of these are interconnected. One doesn't exist without the other. The third crisis is the democratic crisis. A perpetual continuation, Mello says, of a colonial history where dominant powers are allied with a small oligarchy, and they have seen Honduras as a place from which to extract wealth, and they have opposed traditionally any movement towards democratic rule. For the past 120 years, Honduras has been controlled financially and militarily by the US, and troops have been sent in to undo elections that didn't go the way the Americans wanted. Honduras is today governed by an authoritative dictatorship, not only allied with international crime, but the government is in fact a drug cartel ruled by the Hernandez family, with the police and the military of the country complicit and at the service of the Hernandez cartel. This dominant military model is linked to a corrupt judiciary of people, mostly appointed by the Hernandez people, supported by a public media, TV, radio, and the press, owned by the oligarchy, no surprise there, and subsidized by the Hernandez family. The two dominant religious forces in the country, the Evangelical Union, closely tied to United States interests, and the Catholic Church, have both supported the dictatorship. And of course, and there are documents to prove this, they are also financially subsidized by the Hernandez family, by the government. Padre Mello represents the alternative, but he's not the only example of media or human rights organizations or religious organizations that are not supportive of the government and in turn are not supported by the government. Lawyers, journalists, and human rights workers, environmental and land defenders, women's rights defenders, etc. These people are singled out by the dictatorship for criminalization and assassination. Mello uses the phrase, he said, more miserable than the poor, más miserable que los pobres. There are perhaps 250 families that constitute the oligarchic elite. Of them, perhaps 30 families which are dominant. And they are totally allied to foreign economic interests. Janet would know this, others who have traveled to Honduras. You cannot buy gasoline or go into a store without putting money into the pockets of the oligarchy, now including the military. You cannot exchange $1 at the bank without becoming part of the huge money laundering process of international crime. The corruption is total and far spreading. The seventh image is of the sweatshops. Throughout, of course, the land, there are the subsistence farmer class who find it difficult to live above the poverty line. Their children have no hope to remain on the land. The industrial north provides opportunities for slave labor conditions in the maquiladores, the sweatshop industries owned by foreign interests, such as the Canadian Guild and Company, noted for below poverty wages, exploitive working conditions, mostly for young women, and for human rights violations. These foreign-owned companies, and apparently the Canadians are considered to be among the better, are linked to the families of the oligarchy. They enjoy subsidized electrical power, tax-free zones, lack of environmental regulations, and of course, labor unions will be suppressed. The next image is quite disastrous. I want to talk about public health. This is a picture of a ward, a maternity ward in a hospital in San Pedro Sula. Yes, those are women laying on the floor with their babies. The public health situation before the COVID pandemic was already at the bottom. The dictatorship stripped the National Health Institute in 2017 of its resources. That would be kind of equivalent to the Canada National Health Plan. They took the money out to help subsidize the false electoral campaign of the Hernandez family. Even though it's a dictatorship, the Americans require an election campaign. So it costs money to run a campaign, even though it's already decided. Currently, the dictatorship has appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars sent to Honduras after the disasters of the hurricanes in 2020 and the pandemic crisis. No hospitals have been built. There is no vaccination program. Nothing is being done to help the people. The money has simply disappeared, and the people will have to depend on what's called herd immunity when there is a death in every family. The next image begins my discussion about mining, and I am coming to the end. Honduras is a small country of small rolling mountains with few lakes, but many rivers capturing the water of tropical rains. Below the surface are the minerals desired by the industries of the north. Canadian companies have been in Honduras long before the current dictatorship, extracting minerals at a cost of environmental degradation and human displacement. While there are many examples, there is the current struggle of the people of a town called Azacualpa in the Copan northern region of Honduras, struggling against the US Canadian-based Aura Minerals and its open pit cyanide leaching gold mine. Now the company wants to expropriate the entire village and its graveyard to expand the open pit. The next image is about the Garifuna people and something called Little Canada. Mostly along the northern coast of Honduras, we find the Garifuna people, a distinct ethnic group of Afro-Indigenous people with their own language and customs. Their problem, besides being poor and Black, is that their traditional land since the 18th century, to which they had legal land title, contains extensive white sand beaches along the Caribbean coast. Canadian investors have established real estate interests to turn this land of the Garifuna into a Canadian Cancun, a resort for hotel and condominium developments. Already a cruise ship port has opened in the nearby city of Trujillo. Unfortunately for them, for the developers, the Garifuna are in the way of this Canadian version of progress. The Garifuna lands have been expropriated by the Canadians with legal justification paid for by Canadians and Hernandez. Garifuna leaders have been jailed. Some have been killed. Just recently, in the last half year, 5 young men, Garifuna men, were abducted and disappeared, and they will not be found. The next image is of coffins. My journey into Honduras was at the invitation of Padre Melo, who's the director of the Jesuit-owned apostolate of Radio Progreso. I spend a lot of time at the radio station with the staff, including the broadcasting personnel and the investigative journalists who venture out into the into the hotspots. The radio has been shut down twice and vandalized by the military on 2 occasions. Transmission towers just a few years ago were toppled by military explosives. One of the radio station's managers, Carlos Mejia, was murdered in 2014, and other field correspondents of the radio station have been assassinated. Many of the staff at the radio station have received death threats and theoretically are protected by protection orders of the International Court of the International Human Rights Court of the Americas. So was Berta at the time of her murder. In Honduras, to be protected is meaningless. This image is from a protest in Honduras that highlights the assassinations of journalists. There's a photo of each assassinated journalist on each coffin. In Honduras, the government has responded by passing a law that freedom of the press is subservient to protecting the honor of the armed forces. Negative reporting on the interests of the ruling class are met with targeted assassinations. There's so much more to say about Honduras, and this highlights the crisis and the problems. And I've said very little about the strength of the resistance and the determination of small sectors of people who are struggling to bring about change. Perhaps we'll have time to talk about that. And I very much look forward to the presentation by Janet Spring, who I know whose interest in Honduras is not just academic, but also personal. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was an amazing introduction and a very sobering introduction for Canadians to hear. We will have a question and answer and a discussion period at the end of the three speakers. And our next speaker I would welcome is Dr. Janet Spring, who is here from Ontario, which means that she and her colleagues are getting close to midnight as we sit out here and the sun hasn't set quite yet in Victoria. But welcome very much, Janet, and I look forward to hearing your experiences with political prisoners and the rights of political prisoners and the successes that you have had working for them. So please, everyone, let us welcome Janet Spring now.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to ask, can you see my screen? Is my screen?
Yes, I can.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, thank you for, okay, I'll start. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. I represent the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor Committee. Our group is based in Elmvale, Ontario, Springwater Township. Elmvale is about 100 kilometers north of Toronto, close to Georgian Bay. Allow me to also introduce some of our committee who are present here tonight: Christine Nugent and friends, Oksana Shostak, Irene Bell, and Judy Ansell. We have many friends, family, and neighbors who have continually written emails, letters, made phone calls. Our committee of 7 come from Springwater. Our supporters are from our surrounding agricultural community, our faith-based community, and from the wider area of Toronto off to Ottawa. Our local print newspaper, the Springwater News, supports our work. We regularly publish our articles in its bi-weekly paper, and our Springwater News is one of the very few rural papers left that are print and are delivered door to door. Springwater News gets our story out to over 18,000 households and beyond, and is our voice for Honduras. We also use Facebook and Twitter. Our committee is sponsored by the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Barrie and District Labour Council, Simcoe County Retired Teachers, Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, Peaceworks of Midland, and donations come from individuals and business throughout our greater area. The heartbeat of the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor comes from Honduras. Edwin Espinal, Karen Spring, Raul Alvarez, and all of the political prisoners and human rights activists, the Honduran community volunteers, all who struggle for a better world in Honduras. Karen and Edwin live in Tegucigalpa. Karen is the Honduran coordinator of the Honduras Solidarity Network, or the HSN. Pictured is Karen, Edwin, Raul, and me outside of La Tolva prison after Edwin and Raul were released. Just hold on a second. To the right, Edwin is in La Esperanza with a group of children before Berta Cáceres's assassination. Edwin was a good friend of Berta. He worked with her to stop the construction of the dam project on the Cualcarque River in the Lenca community. Our work recently, since March 2020, when the pandemic hit, has been to support the Honduran people in El Progreso and Tegucigalpa, hardest hit from the global pandemic, and in November, the two hurricanes. We send donations to the food programs that feed the children, the elderly, and families displaced from hurricanes Eta and Iota. To date, we have sent approximately $14,000 to grassroots organizers who purchase food, cook the meals, and deliver them to those who are unable to come to the community kitchens. And in the fall, late November, many of these meals were delivered by boat into rural areas that were really hard hit with severe flooding. How SHRIM started, or Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor. On January 19th, Edwin Espinal, in 2018, spouse of my daughter Karen Spring, was arrested in the context of the November 2017 electoral crisis. In November 2017, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the president, was re-elected despite massive voter fraud and the fact that the Honduran Constitution forbids a sitting president to run for a second term. Edwin was arrested, sent to La Tova, maximum security military prison, for speaking against the election. He was charged with property damage, carrying explosives. These are the charges levied against most political prisoners. He was put in solitary confinement for 15 days, then into the prison population. Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor was formed around a farm kitchen table, wasn't it, Christine, to advocate for Edwin's release. This committee garnered support from local Springwater residents through our first community meeting of April 2018. We were amazed at the turnout. At this meeting, we had federal and municipal government representatives who pledged their support of our cause to free Edwin and other political prisoners, also bring attention to the human rights violations occurring in Honduras. And many people had to be educated about Honduras. They really didn't know very much about the country. At this meeting, we announced a Canadian delegation to Honduras, which occurred in May of 2018, sponsored by local community donations and by Public Service Alliance of Canada. Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor also contacted human rights organizations across Canada. We liaised with Mining Watch Canada, Amnesty Canada, Public Service Alliance, Peaceworks, and Jen Moore from Mining Watch Canada assisted us in setting up meetings with parliamentary officials on Parliament Hill and introducing us to politicians we really did not know. We contacted federal, provincial, municipal government reps, and we used a nonpartisan approach. We sent letters in support of Edwin's release to Honduran government officials, letters to Minister Freeland, and we began to travel regularly to Ottawa. We took over 12 trips over the 18 months Edwin was incarcerated. We met with representatives from the Green, Conservative, Liberals, and NDP groups. Elizabeth May was amazing. She offered right away to sponsor an e-petition. Our MP Alex Nuttall offered to sponsor a paper petition, which he presented before the House in February of 2019. On April 30th, 2018, we held a presentation on the steps of Parliament Hill. Member of Parliament Stanton sponsored and held a press conference. Bruce Stanton is the Deputy Speaker of the House. This was attended by Bruce, by Felix Molina, a Honduran national living in Canada, Alex Nuttall, and MP Hardcastle. Cheryl Hardcastle from Windsor was the NDP human rights critic at the time, who in the first week of Edwin's arrest had sent a letter to Minister Freeland and Honduran authorities to demand his release from prison and dropping of all trumped up charges. We also met with the Honduran ambassador to Canada, Sofia Serrato Rodriguez. We contacted and spoke with the Canadian ambassador to Honduras, James Hill. We spoke to him many times, also in the Tegucigalpa Canadian Embassy office. We contacted radio stations, CTV News Barrie, CBC Radio and TV Toronto, The Hill Times in Ottawa. Collingwood Today. We received excellent coverage from a local reporter, Erica Engel, who has followed and reported on the story ever since we began. She also expanded our rural advocacy base. Our articles appear in many newspapers. One of the amazing donations came from a local business person in Barrie who owns Datamax Outdoor Advertising. He donated 2 billboards to advocate for Edwin's release. One was erected close to Elmvale on a well-traveled highway to Wasaga Beach, and on Highway 90 outside of Barrie, which goes from Barrie to the Angus Borden military base. The owner of the billboard says they will stay up until Edwin is here himself to watch them being taken down. Also, he requests a state dinner at the celebration we will have when Edwin comes to Canada through the Canadian Family Immigration Program as a permanent resident. He has to be acquitted of charges at first, of course. CBC Lorenda Redekop also came up and did a story on the billboard, which was aired in 2019. We have a very supportive Springwater Township Council, which has passed 2 resolutions to advocate for Edwin's release and sent them to Ottawa to the now Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marc Garneau, and previously to Minister Freeland. We've heard back recently from Minister Garneau. We didn't get much of a response from Freeland for 2 years, yet she did contact Karen privately. Throughout the time Edwin and Raoul were in prison, these men developed a friendship due to the fact that they were the only 2 political prisoners in La Tova for the first year. They were incarcerated with men who were mostly parts of the M15 and MS-18 gangs. They were in for murder, these people, drug convictions, and most were very dangerous. Edwin and Raoul initiated 2 hunger strikes, first to protest the lack of water and medical attention, and also the filthy conditions in the prison. The horrible drinking water that was pumped out of the local river and bottled for them to drink. The second hunger strike occurred just before they were released. Both men had received death threats from gang members inside. Edwin Raoul and another young political prisoner, Romel Herrera, were placed in a storage cell at this time, with no windows or ventilation in horrible conditions, but they were away from the life-threatening danger, and they were there about 2 weeks before they were finally released. The pressure got very, very strong on the government to release. Karen and Edwin were married. Family was not allowed to attend. Only 2 legal representatives and rights worker. Indian delegations. We sponsored 2 in May of 2018 and May of 2019. We visited Edwin and Raoul in La Tova both times and met with officials from the US and Canadian embassies. We traveled to communities who were in struggles due to land expropriation and to La Esperanza to meet with the organization that Berta Cáceres had founded, COPIN. These delegations were well publicized in Canada, US, and Honduras as we brought attention to the illegal incarceration of political prisoners and to the human rights violations occurring at the hands of the Juan Orlando Hernandez government. These delegations wouldn't have been so successful without the planning and organizing completed by Karen Spring through the Honduras Solidarity Network and Judy Ansell of Cross Border Networks, Kansas City. U.S. human rights orgs have assisted Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor many times, working alongside us in our struggles. At home in Elmvale and Barrie, Our support extends into the schools, where in Barrie, an international studies class took on Edwin's case, studied human rights issues in Honduras, and presented a day of seminars on Honduras issues, then liaised with the local MP, John Broussard. They wrote letters to advocate for Edwin's release and dropping of all charges. Broussard presented these to Minister Freeland, who looks rather reluctant in this photo to either accept the letters or to pose for the photo op. We don't know which. On August 9th, 2019, we got the wonderful news that Edwin and Raul were released from prison, pending trial, of course. We announced a celebration the next morning at one of the billboard signs. We were amazed at the attendance and people honking and stopping as they drove by. Here's a quick news clip that aired later that day.
Family is rejoicing tonight after getting the news they've been waiting to hear for more than a year. Human rights activist Edwin Espinal is no longer behind bars. CTV's Beatrice Baseman joins us now from Elmville. And Beatrice, how's the family doing?
Well, Mike, they're relieved. This has been an incredibly emotional 18 months for Edwin Espinal and his family, both in Honduras and right here in Elmville. And while he is home free today, his mother-in-law tells me this is just the beginning of what's expected to be a grueling legal battle.
We decided to put Edwin's story on Bristol board.
Edwin Espinal has never stepped foot in Simcoe County, but since January 2018, Janet Spring has been fighting for her son-in-law's release.
When he was first arrested, I thought that I would call our member of parliament and they would act because he is part of our Canadian family and that he would be out shortly.
It took a lot longer than she expected, but Espinal was granted bail yesterday morning and set free. His Canadian partner of almost 10 years, who he married behind the walls of the maximum security prison, was there to take him home.
He says it's like he's been like born again. He says, I feel like I've been in a hole for the last year and a half, and I'm just seeing everything new for the first time.
Espinal, a human rights advocate, was considered a political prisoner. He was picked up following anti-government protests in his native country, accused of damaging property during a demonstration, and held in pretrial detention in conditions Spring describes as inhumane.
They live in a cell with 9 men with a toilet in the middle of the cell. The toilet's only flushed twice a day.
It's a chapter of his life Espinal's wife Karen says he wants to put behind him. He left the prison yesterday with his arm around his sister and, undeterred, whisked off to speak at a concert for political prisoners.
Here in Honduras. So he's like, I want to go to a protest. I want to like join, get right back into it. So he hasn't changed at all in that way.
The support for Espinal also hasn't changed in Elmville, where community members gathered today along with his Canadian family to celebrate his release.
Justice is now finally starting to move along here, and we wish them the best in the weeks ahead.
As Espinal and other political prisoners prepare to answer to their allegations and have their day in court. Espinal's trial is set to begin this Thursday. Both Janet Spring and her daughter Karen will be in that courtroom in Honduras. They tell me their goal is ultimately to see all the charges against him dropped. Reporting to Elmville, I'm Beatrice Baseman. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Police in Elmville family is rejoicing.
Many people have asked us, what got Edwin and Raul out of prison? Do you think that the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor was effective in making that release happen? Well, somewhat. Canadian advocacy at home here did help, as many wrote letters and made phone calls. The U.S. international human rights groups helped as well. The Spanish and EU embassies and the U.S. did go in to check on Edwin and Raul in the prison. Canada sent representatives to his hearing. That's what CTV News was referring to, not the trial, to let them know the international community is watching. Yet it has certainly been a concerted effort with U.S. Canadian advocacy, the Honduras Solidarity Network, Cross Border Networks, Amnesty Canada, and the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, and many others. The HSN and Cross Border Networks have sponsored and organized many delegations to Honduras, advocating for political prisoners and bringing attention to government corruption, drug trafficking, the Hernandez family and National Party affiliation, and their co-conspiring with drug cartels. Karen initiated a podcast in 2020, Honduras Now. This follows the story of human rights violations in Honduras, but our work in Canada is not complete. So for the past 2 months, our committee has been once again meeting with MP Stanton and our new MP Doug Shipley, both of the Conservative Party. They have organized meetings with the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor and MP Michael Chong, and most recently, MP Rob Oliphant. Rob is the parliamentary secretary to Minister Garneau, the Foreign Affairs Minister, who has recently replied to our Springwater Township resolution and a letter from MP Stanton and Shipley. Oliphant has apprised us that Edwin's case is well known in the Foreign Affairs Office, and they will be moving forward to discuss the upcoming trial with the Canadian ambassador to Honduras, James Hill, Honduran authorities, and the Honduran ambassador to Canada, Sofia Rodriguez. We're hoping for a complete acquittal for both Edwin and Raul, as evidence is greatly lacking to convict. Yet with a corrupt government linked strongly to the judicial system, we have our fears for the September 13th and 14th trial in 2021. If it is not once again postponed, that will be for the third time. If convicted, Edwin and Raul could face 15 to 25 years. Other human rights workers, such as the Wapino water defenders, Copine, as the family fights for justice for Berta Cáceres, the Pimienta defenders, and many, many more, face uphill battles in Honduras to advocate for many human rights necessities: proper health care and education, proper government, land rights, proper living conditions and job opportunities, and attention to environmental concern that Phil was talking about. All that come with a proper democratic government, not an oligarchy government. And of course, continued advocacy and fighting. With COVID restrictions, another delegation to attend the trial this September may not be possible, yet our advocacy and speaking up will continue. So thank you for this opportunity, for sharing this story that could not have been without the great support from our rural community and beyond, and those everywhere who understand the importance of, as Justin Trudeau mentioned at some point when we were advocating for Edwin's release, to standing up for human rights. So thank you very much. And I have some information on the last slide that if you're interested, I can send you some information. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. That was wonderful. And I am so amazed at how you have organized a community in Canada to care about a few people in a distant country and made it all so real and personal. And it is part of our Canadian heritage as a colonial power, as a mining power, that we are complicit in the kind of things that were happening to political prisoners. And please keep in touch with us so that we know what's going on in September. And I would be happy if you sent your information and we can include it in a report on this event tonight. Thank you again. Exa Alvarez, who is in Spain, and so it's about 5 o'clock in the morning her time, and yet she said she was willing to come and talk about her wonderful country of Honduras and her experiences as a rights advocate. So let us please welcome Exa. Are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Oh, lovely. Welcome, welcome. It's so wonderful to see you. Please go ahead and tell people about yourself and your experiences.
Okay, first, I'm sorry because my English is not so very good, but I will try to speak in English, okay? um, Thank you very much, Phil and Janet, for the information and giving us the context about what is happening in Honduras. Thank you so much, Terry, for the invitation to be here today. It is a pleasure to be here with you talking about my country, although it is also very sad because the reality we are talking about is very hard. In the Arpillera, nobody is illegal, which I made last year during the confinement in the pandemic, represent that hard reality that is lived in Honduras and that causes the forced displacement of thousands of Hondurans every year. I currently live in Barcelona, and although I migrated in other conditions, I have also had to live under the stigma to being a migrant with all that this entails, not being able to work legally, not being able to leave the country, living in fear of being deported. All these fears, my personal circumstances, and the migrant caravans in Honduras motivated me to do this textile work as a way to mend the deep sadness I felt at the time. I am now working with unaccompanied foreign minors who have to leave their countries due to the violence and lack of opportunities. I am also volunteering to provide psychological care to people affected by hurricanes Eta and Iota in Honduras. And I think that we have a lot of work to do as humanity so that no one has to live in condition of extreme poverty and vulnerability, so that corrupt and dictatorial governments do not exist and are not accepted, and so that no one has to flee their country and have to live under the stigma of illegality, so that no one has to lose their life violently. So thank you very much to have this kind of meetings and to support countries like Honduras, because it's a reality, a very bad reality that Honduras live in this moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Egsa.